My topic of presentation is cochlear implants from surgical approach to device performance. My main focus today will be on the key steps in cochlear implant surgery and the related issues which one may face during the surgical procedure and tips to tackle these problems. Only few would have imagined the progress that has been made in the past 40 years regarding aiding the deafened patients, and the future promises to be equally exciting. It was in 2017 we could get GMC Nagpur recognized as a dedicated center for cochlear implant surgery. Cochlear implant is a technologically advanced medical device which converts the sound signal into electrical impulse, which then directly stimulates the cochlear nerve. It is a miracle of modern electronics and microsurgery which has given hope to the people who suffer with profound deafness and are beyond the range of help from hearing aids. Cochlear implant has two main components. The external component, which is called as the speech processor, and the internal component called the implant, which is surgically implanted in the cochlea. The electrodes, they have multiple channels which then stimulate the cochlear nerve tissue, mainly the spiral ganglion cells of the cochlea, firing the auditory nerve, ultimately reaching the brain where it is interpreted as sound. Selecting the right candidate is crucial for optimum performance of the device. The first FDA-approved implant was done in adults in 1972, and this continued to be used till 1985. Later on came the multi-channel cochlear implants, and FDA approval for this was given in 1985 for adults and 1990 for children. Children above 2 years of age. So from the initial indication of unilaterally implanting adults to the present indications of bilateral cochlear implantation in children, and recently the implanting recipients with residual hearing and the single-sided deafness, there is wide change in the candidacy criteria. A multidisciplinary approach is needed to determine the CI candidacy. Selection is done on case-by-case basis. The group of professionals, which include the cochlear implant surgeon, the pediatrician, audiologist, speech-language pathologist, psychologists, and the anesthetist, they work together and to prepare the child for cochlear implant surgery. If the child has any other associated issues, then the referrals are done accordingly to the neurologist, ophthalmologist, and the developmental pediatrician. The management protocol, it includes accurate evaluation and assessment followed by hearing aid trial for a period of 3 to 6 months. If the child has not benefited, then the child is taken for surgery, followed by post-operative rehabilitation, which includes intensive speech therapy for a period of 2 to 3 years and periodic mapping of the device. The medical evaluation includes identifying the cause of hearing loss and the status of the cochlea and the auditory nerve. ENT examination is done to rule out any active middle ear disease like acute otitis media, secretory otitis media, or perforation of the tympanic membrane, which has to be treated prior to the surgery. The medical evaluation is done if the child has any other syndromic associations like the congenital rubella syndrome or the JLN syndrome. The auditory test battery includes pure tone audiometry or the behavioral observation audiometry, the BERA test, ASSR, tympanometry with the acoustic reflexes, otoacoustic emission, and the speech language evaluation test. Preoperative imaging plays a pivotal role in the patient selection. HRCT of the temporal bone is important to study the anatomical details like the nematization of the mastoid, the condition of the cochlea, and specifically the course of the facial nerve. It also helps us to identify conditions which may have an impact on the surgical procedure and to rule out findings that may preclude the surgery. One should also be aware of the different cochlear anomalies which can be picked up on imaging, like the Mondinus deformity, common cavity, large vestibular aqueduct, choanal atresia, ossicular cochlea, and Sinus internal auditory meatus. The point here is that there are different abnormalities and of the inner ear, and so the electrode choice should be based on where the spiral ganglion cells are located, and the choice of electrode can be done accordingly. MRI, especially for assessing the patency of the cochlear lumen and the presence of the auditory nerve. Coming to the surgical technique, cochlear implant surgery is a technologically demanding surgery with precision needed at every step and has a steep learning curve. Before taking the patient for surgery, one has to ensure that all the essential equipments are in place and in good working condition. The operation theatre should be clean with preferably laminar airflow. Strict asepsis should be followed with restricted people inside the OT. Preoperative preparation of the operative area is done. The hairs are shaved in the post-auricular area in case of adults, while in children the head is shaved completely. The surgery is performed under general anesthesia. Before taking the child for surgery, preoperatively antibiotic broad spectrum is selected. Facial nerve monitor is attached with all leads in position, and the Boyle's apparatus is kept at the leg end of the patient so that there is enough space for the surgical team and the instruments to move around. Here I will be describing the standard posterior tympanotomy technique. So the first step is marking the incision. As you can see in the first picture, that the incisions have evolved over a period of time from the large incisions to the present mini postoral incision, which is taken from about half a centimeter behind the retroauricular sulcus from the mastoid tip, extending superiorly little posteriorly in a lazy S fashion. Then the receiver stimulator bed is marked. The implant companies will be providing you with the instruments, surgical instrument kit, and the receiver stimulator is marked at 1.5 centimeter behind the postauricular incision at an angle of 45 degrees to the Frankfurt's plane. Frankfurt's plane is an imaginary plane which passes from the lateral canthus of the eye through the external auditory canal. So the receiver stimulator unit should be placed 45 degrees to this plane. After marking the incision, the operative area is prepared, painted and draped. When we are painting the operative area, a little betadine is left into the external auditory canal. This will be serving as a marker. If in case inadvertently the external auditory canal is opened, the betadine will flow in the field. After painting, Ioban, which is a sterile sticky iodine drape, is applied with the pinna folded anteriorly. With the number 15 blade, the skin incision is given. Depending upon the surgeon's choice, a dual or a triple flap design is made to prevent the implant from extrusion. We usually prefer a superiorly based musculoperiosteal flap to cover the receiver stimulator unit completely. The soft tissue is then retracted with the help of mastoid retractors, but especially in pediatric cases, we prefer surgical sutures for retractor. Before making or drilling the bed, one should be aware of the skull thickness in children. The skull thickness increases as the age advances. In newborn, it is about 1 to 2 millimeter thick, which grows up to 4 mm by 3 years of age. And one can accurately measure the skull thickness on the scan as well. So, in an average 3 years old child, the skull thickness will be around 3 to 4 millimeter. The bed of the receiver stimulator package should be around more than 3.5 centimeter away from the external auditory canal with an angulation of 45 degrees as I have told earlier. The depth and the shape of the bed will depend upon the implant dimensions and the age of the patient. The bed is drilled up to the level of the dura, keeping an island of bone in the center, which is called as the Bill's island. One should take care that the edges of the bed are smooth and straight rather than sloping, because sloping edges will accelerate migration of the receiver stimulator unit. The size of the bed drilled is checked with the help of the well template for a perfect fit. Then depending upon the surgeon's choice, the tie-down holes are made either on the one side or both sides of the bed. This is to have an additional security for the position of the RS unit. Then the electrode channel is drilled from the bed up to the mastoidectomy, which we have performed at the sinodural angle. It should be straight with overhanging edges to accommodate the electrode array, and the K-bridge is made to anchor the electrode array. Alternatively, one can use a tight subperiosteal pocket, especially in very young children, where the receiver stimulator is kept between the temporoparietal and the temporo-occipital suture line. If one has to do a cortical mastoidectomy, the idea about the depth of the mastoid antrum is important. As we all know that in adults, the depth of the antrum from the cortex is about 12 to 15 millimeters. But in a 2-year-old child, it is approximately 3 mm, and this increases by 1 mm every year, reaching about 13 to 14 mm by 12 to 13 years of age. For example, if you want to implant a child who is 4 years of age, so the depth of the antrum will be around 5 millimeters. And this will also give us idea regarding the selection of the size of the burr. So you can downsize the burr by 1 mm. A cortical mastoidectomy is performed. This is different from a standard mastoidectomy in that the edges are kept sharp and overhanging to accommodate the electrode array. And in this case, if you see the shape of the cortical mastoidectomy, it is little bit triangular as compared to the kidney-shaped mastoidectomy done in routine cases. Here, as well as all the air cells need not be exenterated as in cases of standard mastoidectomy. One has to identify the landmarks of the mastoid antrum, and the most important is the lateral semicircular canal, which is a constant landmark, the adductus, and the short process of incus. Then the posterior tympanotomy is performed by the facial recess approach. Facial recess is a triangular area which is bounded superiorly by the incus buttress, posteromedially by the vertical portion of the facial nerve, anterolaterally by the chorda tympani nerve, and inferiorly by the chordofacial angle. The important points in doing the posterior tympanotomy by facial recess approach is you should use a 3 mm diamond burr for drilling the facial recess. This can be anticipated. The width of the facial recess can be anticipated on imaging. So a good facial recess will be more than 2.5 millimeters. If it is less than that, then you have to choose the burr accordingly. One may also come across a facial recess cell which is called as the sentinel cell or the herald cell. This makes the job of the surgeon little easy by providing a direct access to the middle ear. Then the posterior tympanotomy is widened to its margin to all around to visualize the inside of the middle ear. So the structures which should be seen through a wide posterior tympanotomy is the incudostapedial joint superiorly, the stapedius tendon, the pyramid, and the round window niche. Sometimes the round window niche will be hidden by the inferior extension of the pyramid, which is called as ponticulus pyramidalis, and this needs to be drilled to see for the round window niche. Some do's and don'ts for the facial nerve delineation in cochlear implant. We can get enough idea about the course of facial nerve on imaging, but one should be ready for surprises on table. Keep the facial landmarks in view throughout. Try to look for the sentinel cell. If it is not present, then you have to drill at the region of the superior part of the facial recess, which is the widest, and then keep on widening it inferiorly. Drill with a polishing burr up to the facial nerve without exposing it. You have to skeletonize the facial nerve, but you don't have to open it. So you will see the blue pink tinge of the facial nerve. Also, there should be constant irrigation during drilling in this area because the thermal trauma caused by diamond burr is much more than the cutting burr. Simultaneously, you have to continue thinning of the posterior canal wall. Avoid injury to the canal wall skin. Then exposure of the facial nerve sheath is inconsequential. Avoid the shaft of the burr touching the exposed facial nerve. This may occur when you are doing the cochleostomy, so the shaft of the burr, you may be concentrating on cochleostomy and the shaft of the burr may be touching the exposed facial nerve. So this may also traumatize the facial nerve. So you should change the angle of the burr and the drilling. So the round window membrane is then delineated by drilling the round window niche. The round window niche is usually drilled with the help of 1 millimeter diamond burr. The anterior and the superior lip are opened. Care should be taken to when you are removing the posterior lip, especially because the modulus lies in close proximity with the posterior lip and that will contain the nerve fibers. There are three different approaches of electrode insertion or cochleostomy. The first is the round window approach, which is the most commonly used approach. Second is a little modification of this approach, which is the extended round window approach. And third is the cochleostomy approach. In the round window approach, after you have exposed the round window 360 degrees, you, with the help of a straight pick, you incise the round window without injuring the annulus. You have to keep the annulus of the round window intact and then you can advance the electrode array through this opening. Round window is a fixed anatomical landmark with direct access to the scala tympani. It requires minimal drilling on the cochlea, so the trauma caused by thermal trauma as well as the acoustic trauma caused by drilling is less. There is increased probability of mid-scala tympani entry, which is the preferred one, below the basilar membrane and the spiral ligament. And however, it has some disadvantages, which include that it may not be feasible in all cases and it has a difficult insertion trajectory. Coming to the next approach, that is the cochleostomy approach. In this case, the cochleostomy is done anterior and inferior to the round window. In this diagram, you can see that the black circle denotes the round window cochleostomy approach. And the yellow circle denotes the extended round window approach. So in cochleostomy approach, we have a confidence of easy insertion trajectory because the electrode will have a direct alignment with the scala tympani. There is great variation in the cochleostomy placement which can lead to mid-scala, scala media or scala vestibula insertions. So how do you select which route should be used for the insertion portal? So this decision making has been made easy by visualization of the round window membrane angulation and the amount of round window membrane which can be visualized through the posterior tympanotomy. So if the round window membrane angulation is less than 45 degrees or if more than 60% of the round window membrane is visible, then round window insertion is safe and atraumatic. If the angle is more than 45 degrees or it is less, or the round window visibility is less than 60%, then cochleostomy is the preferred route of electrode insertion. This was a study which was done by Professor Rob Briggs from Australia in 2005, where he had studied the different angulations of the round window. So 0 and 45 is favorable for the round window insertion, while the 90-degree angulation is much difficult, and in that case a cochleostomy can be used. And in this first diagram, we can see one denotes the round window insertion trajectory, which is very difficult, especially because of the presence of the crista falciformis in the anterior-inferior part of the round window. So there is more chances of hitting the basilar membrane if the trajectory is not taken properly. While 2 denotes the trajectory in cases of cochleostomy, where you can see that it is directly going into the scala tympani of the cochlea. Here, this is a classification which is famous by STH classification given by St. Thomas Hospital, and they have graded the round window visibility into 3 types. Type 1 is 100% of the round window membrane is visible. Type 2 is again divided into A and B. In type 2A, more than 50% of the round window membrane is visible. In type 2B, less than 50% round window is visible, and type 3 is the most difficult one, where 0% round window membrane visibility is there. So depending upon this classification, in type 1, they have advised to do a membranous cochleostomy, that is the classical round window insertion. In type 2A, either round window or an extended round window approach can be used. In type 2B, an extended round window or a conventional bony cochleostomy can be done, while in type 3, one has to go for a conventional bony cochleostomy. Professor Thomas Balkany used this term, which is called as adaptive cochleostomy, and he states that there is no fixed criteria to which, depending upon the visibility, which approach should be used. It should be preferred, it should be dependent upon the surgical anatomy and the preference of the surgeon. Few words about this approach, which is called as the extended posterior tympanotomy approach, where if the facial recess is very narrow and the round window membrane visibility is very poor, one can go for an extended facial recess approach. In this case, the facial posterior tympanotomy is widened anteriorly and inferiorly, sacrificing the chorda tympani now, but one has to take care that there should not be injury to the vertical part of the facial nerve. If still we cannot see the round window niche, there is a modification of this technique which is called as the Buckman's technique. In this, the posterior canal wall is thinned adequately and two cuts are given superiorly and inferiorly, and the posterior canal wall can be pushed anteriorly, keeping the skin of the canal wall intact and the annulus. So you can have a infero-posterior visualization of the middle ear cavity and see the round window niche. After adequate hemostasis is achieved, opening of the implant is done, and also one should take care that the monopolar cautery should be disconnected and the gloves should be changed. The receiver stimulator unit is then positioned in the subperiosteal pocket, and also one should ensure that it is nicely fitting and does not move. The ground electrode is then placed underneath the temporalis muscle in direct contact with the bone. The electrode array is then gently grasped and advanced through the cochleostomy into the cochlear lumen. Some important tips for electrode insertion. When you are inserting the electrode, do not grasp the active part of the electrode. The implant company will be providing with specific instruments like the AOS forceps, which is an advanced oscillate forceps, and this can be used to hold the handle and then advance the electrode array in the cochlea. Align the forceps with the cochlear opening. The insertion should be slow and smooth, and the speed of insertion should be less. And it is said that the time of insertion should be more than 30 seconds. One should aim for a complete insertion. This can be assessed by inserting the electrode array up to the almost to the mid level of the cochlea, and there will be a marker on the distal part of the electrode array. Either a ring or a jog will be there, which has to be positioned at the round window or the cochleostomy. And then finally the cochleostomy is sealed either with a fascia or periosteum, or if you are anticipating a perilimb gusher, then muscle should be used. The extra electrode loop is then positioned in the mastoid cavity with a slack for future growth. The surgical wound is finally closed, and the subcuticular suture is given along with absorbable monofilament. Intraoperative ECAP measurements are done to assess the functioning of the device and stimulation of the auditory nerve, and the C-arm is done to confirm the position of electrode array in the cochlea. Mastoid pressure dressing is given, which is kept for 3 days, and the wound is inspected on the 3rd day. Broad spectrum antibiotic is given which is stepped down to oral antibiotics later on. Before discharging the patient, a modified Stenvers view is done with 50 degrees angle to the cassette to confirm the electrode position in the cochlea, and the device activation is done 2 to 3 weeks after the surgery. A brief regarding the other surgical technique for cochlear implant. This is called the Varia technique. The name is given from the place where it was first performed. It is a non-mastectomy technique which is done through the endoral route for the cochleostomy, which is transcanal tunnel drilled in the posterior canal wall. And it was first described by Kyriatzidis in 1997 and published in 2000. This is a Trifons perforator which has a drill bit, and there is a guard which is directed towards the drill bit. And a transcanal direct tunnel is made, which will be the pathway for the active electrode. And the cochleostomy in this case is done transcanal through the external auditory canal after elevation of the tympanomeatal flap. One more technique is there, which is the suprameatal technique, not commonly used. It was described by Cronenberg in 1999 based on the blind eticotomy approach, where the etic is opened superior to the external auditory canal and the electrode is inserted blindly, which will go medial to the incus, and then the rest of the steps are same as in the Varia technique. There are other approaches also, like the middle cranial fossa approach, the pericanal electrode insertion technique, and the transmastoid labyrinthotomy approach. Talking about the surgical challenges in cochlear implant, first and very important is when we are implanting very young children, especially who below the age of 1 year. In these children, there is greater proportion of the bone marrow in the mastoid, so there is a greater risk of bleeding during mastectomy. So this can be avoided by using a diamond burr instead of a cutting burr. In addition to this, the blood loss from the mastoid emissary vein can have also a greater impact on the circulating blood volume. So this also can be tackled effectively if you know on imaging the position of the emissary vein. Second point is that in children, the post-auricular scalp is very thin and more delicate, so it should be handled with utmost care and gentleness. The last point is, as the skull grows, there is a chance of electrode migration because the distance between the cochlea and the skull also increases. So this extra loop of electrode array which we have positioned in the mastectomy has to be kept without any entanglement to have a scope for further growth. Surgery for cochlear implantation exposes the patient for risk of complications. They can be grouped into major complications and minor complications. Major complications are those which require further surgery or explantation, and they cause a significant medical and psychological problem for the parents as well as the child. These include wound infection, flap necrosis, facial nerve paralysis, device failure or device migration, CSF leak, meningitis. Minor complications usually settle with conservative treatment and local wound care. Though surgery is important and challenging, it is not enough to guarantee success. Intensive auditory therapy, auditory training and speech therapy is necessary for about 2 to 3 years post-implantation. This is AVT therapy, which is a method of teaching the child to listen and speak using their hearing technology. The mother is sitting next to the child and is given some activity like identifying the different animals. The main focus is on audition initially, depending upon their later on development of the speech. The outcome or the performance of cochlear implant depends on multiple factors. These include the cause of hearing loss, that is congenital or acquired, duration of deafness and auditory deprivation, age at implantation, presence of residual hearing, a functioning auditory nerve, and in case of adults, a good speech, language, and communication skill, and a very good motivation and support from the family is must with realistic expectations. This is Arushi, who is our first cochlear implant recipient after 18 months post implantation.
4, 5, 6, 7,
You can see, you can hear the clarity of the speech, and she is now attending the regular school. This is Sanskruti, who is our second recipient. She was implanted at the age of 3 years, 2 years post implantation. So it's rewarding to see the results and the difference this technology could make in their lives. Thank you.